Hey guys, today I figured I'd share 10 PlayStation 1 games with you all, maybe as a bit of a PSA. These are games that I have actually ended up buying and adding to my personal PlayStation 1 collection here. These are games that while I have maybe gotten some stream value out of them over on Twitch, for the average person, I can't recommend any of these games. Let's get into it. Alright guys, we are going to go ahead and get started here in alphabetical order, and I can almost guarantee most of you guys guessed that this game would be on this list. I'm putting it here somewhat reluctantly because I have very mixed feelings about this game, but ultimately I have to acknowledge that it is not a great game, and that is Bubsy 3D. Yes, the infamous PlayStation 1 release. Now, obviously Bubsy has had a host of different video games over the years, predating this game, and even all the way up into the modern generations with games like Woolly Strike Back. He's had a bit of a resurgence, I think mostly as a meme. Most of his output has been pretty rough, and many people point to this one as being probably the worst one. I have played some of the others. I personally don't think that this is the worst of the Bubsy franchise, but I do get why people don't enjoy it. On my first playthrough, I had a lot of hard times trying to get through this. I think it took me about 15 hours or so to like actually finish the game the first time around, and it is a brutal, rough 15 hours. You are going to get repeatedly robbed of lives. You're gonna have a really rough time getting through levels, and I think that is the biggest issue with this game is frankly the level design. As much as people like to pick apart the movement, the jumping, there are definitely critiques to be made in those areas as well. This is far from a perfect example of how a 3D platformer should be done on the PS1, but I think in a lot of areas it's better than people give it credit. But the level design is definitely a hindrance to this game, especially the later levels. You will spend eons trying to figure out where you're supposed to be going. The devs did not have a good knack for building larger levels that guide the player through them effectively, and it's definitely the biggest problem with this game. I have to admit, I gotta come clean, I have done some speedruns of this game and I've learned some of the tech, and that is the reason that I own this game and that I feel that it might be worth maybe giving a second look, is if you're willing to put in a little extra elbow grease and time to like really sink into it and get good at it. You know, I have to admit, speedrunning this game, you do skip a lot of the game, which does make it more enjoyable. You skip a lot of the more mundane, a lot of the more infuriating and frustrating moments. So that's the reason that I own this one in my collection. With all these games, they are bad in their own right, but they usually have at least some sort of element that keeps me coming back in some shape or form. Otherwise, I don't keep them in the collection. So Bubsy 3D, have a lot of mixed emotions on this one, but overall it definitely is worthy of being in this video. Now, if you guys thought Bubsy 3D was like the pinnacle of janky bad PS1 games, honestly, we got more to go through here, and I would make a case if one game was to get like the king of all bad PS1 games moniker, if I had to choose one that represents the best of the absolute worst, I think it would go to this game. And I think the only reason it hasn't is because people just don't know that this game exists, and that is Cosmic Race. This was a Japanese exclusive that came out in 1994, the launch year of the PS1 in Japan, before we got it in 1995 in the States and elsewhere. This is such an early game. I don't know if it was a launch game for sure, but the catalog number, if you guys don't know, every PS1 game has a 5-digit catalog number. This game has the catalog number 00009. It is that early. This had to be like the 9th game registered with Sony. I don't know if it was the 9th released, because release dates don't always match up with the catalog numbers, but regardless, it was extremely early. So this was like one of the first titles on offer for the PS1 in Japan, and honestly, if I had seen this cover in 1994, you know, cool futuristic looking hovercraft, some cool little Japanese original characters on the cover, I probably would have picked this up too, and I would have been absolutely floored by the game that I received. In all fairness, in 94, going off the heels of something like a Super Nintendo or a Genesis, I think visually this probably would have been more impressive. Now it looks like total BS. It looks so bad compared to what came later on this console. This game is somewhat infamous for basically pulling most of its assets from the PlayStation developer SDK, and it honestly shows, because it just looks like a mishmash of just a bunch of random things. But before I get ahead of myself too much, this is a racing game. It is a futuristic hovercraft racer. This also has one of the strangest control methods in a video game that I've personally ever played. And I've played a lot of racing games, a lot lot of which have wonky controls, this honestly takes the cake. Not only do you have to use the D-pad, but you use all 4 of the face buttons just to maneuver, like just to turn, just to tilt, just to move your vehicle. Accelerate is done with R1, which is honestly like probably the most normal thing about it. Trying to maneuver in this game takes a PhD. It's insane. It's absolutely crazy. Honestly, I do in some way recommend people at least try it. I don't think it's worth spending any money on, but if you have some way to try this out just to see how weird and strange the PS1 can get, this is a pretty damn good example of how just some stuff slipped through. You know, the mid-90s was a wild time for video games, and this is one of the wildest. I do have a full playthrough of this on my channel. As far as I know, I'm the only person on the internet to do so. So if you're out there and you're like, you're a king of the trash, I dare you to try and finish this. Now, this next one I'm sure will not surprise any longtime viewers of my Twitch streams, but of course it had to make it onto this list because I personally do think this game really is atrocious, and especially coming from such a brand name like Crash Bandicoot. This is Now, if you guys are unaware of this game, this is essentially Sony and Eurocom's take on the Mario Party franchise. This is a minigame compilation that no doubt Sony saw the success of Mario Party on the N64 and said that they needed some sort of substitute, some sort of competitor to entice maybe a younger audience to the PlayStation brand. Honestly, as a competitor to Mario Party, as a entry in the Crash franchise, albeit a spin-off, I honestly think it fails in both regards, and that is why this game is on this list. The mini games in this game are frankly very uninspired, many of which are either just repetitive or not fun in the slightest, and they feel like rejects that maybe Hudson Soft would have entertained for a little bit before scrapping and actually coming up with a solid mini game for one of the Mario parties. I know it sounds harsh, but it's genuinely the way I feel about just about every mini game on this. What is even worse, if the mini games weren't mediocre enough, they force you in order to finish this game to replay them again and again and again. You have to replay some of these mini games 4, 5, 6 times. It's absurd, and there are mini games that aren't that good to begin with. I can't recommend this to anyone. I think if you're gonna play a party game with some friends, hell, even on the PlayStation 1 you can do better than this. Frankly, I don't see why this needs to be in anybody's collection. It is a Crash game, so I think for that reason alone, people are gonna want it in their collections, and I happen to have this copy signed by good old Alan here, so clearly Alan didn't want this game anymore. So Alan, thanks for your copy of Crash. Now, I should mention before we get into this next one that I do like this franchise, this series. It is a long-running TV show. I also really like the host that is featured in this game, but honestly, despite all of those things, I cannot recommend this version of the game to anyone, and that is Family Feud for the PS1. There are other versions of Family Feud that I really enjoy. In fact, I really like streaming games like this on Twitch because they're a fun way to get people engaged and talking, and they're just fun to play with a chat, and it works so well in a stream setting that I do actually end up playing games like this a lot. And so naturally I was gonna get to this one, and despite the fact that it has Louis Anderson, it's got filmed FMVs with him specifically for the game, which are, they are wonderful. The problem is they are absolutely bogged down by a broken, incompetent mess of a quiz show game. And you would think, how do you mess up a quiz show game? Well, really it's simple. Make the answers hard to answer. I have had multiple times in this game where I will answer a question and I will get one of the top answers, but it is not spelled exactly the same way. It is not put into words exactly the same way as the game says it should be, and therefore it doesn't count. For example, I've said car in an instance where they wanted car payment.
Only the one bill that you'd love to have paid off. You never know what's going to be up there.
Why no low poly Louis Anderson? Because the FMV's better. No way!
Oh well.
Good answer. But
What?
Top 4. You get it, family number 2.
Oh yeah, family number 2. How was car not even on the list?
What was in second? And to complete
Car payment! You gotta be kidding me. You gotta be kidding
that
me.
takes us to the end of this
No
round.
way.
But
I hate this game. I hate this game. I hate this game. I said money in an instance where they wanted no money. I figured money was good enough. I figured car was good enough. If I was playing the game show, if I got on television and was playing Family Feud, Steve Harvey was there, my answers would have been just fine. This game is way, way too specific about what it counts as a proper answer and an improper answer. And for that reason alone, it pretty much busts this game. It makes it very hard to enjoy. And not only that, but also round 4 in this game triples points. And I have had games where I will win rounds 1, 2, and 3. And then round 4, AI just sweeps up, they clean house. Also because in round 4, you can only take 1 miss before it passes on to the next family. So round 4 basically makes rounds 1 through 3 a waste of time. It's basically a charade. Again, the answers being as specific as they are just really make this a tough recommend. Now this next game is a one that I ended up picking up just kind of on a whim. I do that on occasion because I stream so much and PS1 is one of my favorite systems to collect for. Sometimes I'll just take a shot on something that I'm not sure on, and this is one of those cases where it backfired. In fact, I said earlier that I tend to only keep games around that have some sort of interesting slant to them or some angle that I keep them. The cover art alone might convince you to maybe keep the game, but otherwise it is pretty much a mess, and that is a game called Iwatobi Penguin Rocky X Hopper 2. This is another minigame compilation, and in some ways it's better than Crash Bash, and in other ways it's quite a bit worse. I would argue that obviously having these like crazy looking penguins, there's tons of CGI footage of these penguins too. I don't know if this is like some sort of franchise in Japan. I mean, it must be. This is the sequel. I haven't played the first game, but it's got some crazy early mid-90s CG footage packed into this bad boy. Honestly, that reason makes me kind of want to hang on to it, but otherwise the mini games themselves are really atrocious. There's this block jumping mini game where you're collecting items, and if you fall off any of the boxes, you immediately lose the round. There's another mini game that was just basically like match the button prompts. Very, very lazy. We're talking like elementary type game design here. Probably the worst one, and the one that made me shut this game off when I got to it, was basically a memory matching game, right? If you've played any sort of game where you have a set of tiles and usually there's like images on the other side of the tile, right? And you flip the tile and the goal is to get 2 in a row, you match them, and once you match all of them, you win, right? Pretty basic. They somehow screwed that up. And how do you do that? Well, you don't use the images. You step on the tile, it plays a sound effect. It plays a sound effect, and you have to match the sounds of the tiles. And then once you match the sounds, that's when the tile flips over with the image and the images are the same. It is one of the strangest memory games I've ever played in my life. I was infuriated by such a moronic decision. And what was even worse was the fact that it was all based on animals, right? So you get all these animal noises. They would have multiple of the same animal in the same puzzle. Oh my God, that was total blind luck. There's 2 different cat noises? Yo, what the fuck? Why would they do that? So there was one time where there were literally like 3 different cat noises that were slightly different, and they expected you to somehow match up the proper cat noises together. So yeah, that is just a small glimpse of what Iwatobi Penguin Rocky X Hopper 2 has in store for you, and I'm getting mad just thinking about it. Next one up is a game from a popular franchise in Japan. This was a Japanese only release, and that is actually part of the Simple series too. This is the Simple 2000 Characters series, Volume 3, Kamen Rider: The Bike Race. Yeah, quite the title. Obviously based off the Kamen Rider franchise that has a successful run in Japan. Big, massive success. And of course there's gonna be video games, and there are actually quite a few Kamen Rider games that I quite enjoy, even on the PlayStation 1. This is probably the worst Kamen Rider game I've played. Now, obviously with the title Bike Race, it's a bike racing video game. Not only is the handling pretty damn awkward, the level designs feel like like they weren't designed for the game that it's a part of. It is very hard not to hit walls in this game. It is almost impossible, actually, in the final stage. I have to mention, I almost slipped out and said third stage there. I guess we might as well get to it. This game only has 3 tracks. In fact, I beat this game in under 10 minutes without even really trying. It is one of the shortest games. It's probably the cardinal sin of this release, is the fact that there is no content to speak of. It is, you blink and you miss it. I've literally had people come into my stream and they're like, oh, that was the game? I'm like, yep, that's it. That is all of Kamen Rider the Bike Race. And if you stepped out to get like a tea or something, you missed the whole game. Like, seriously, it is wild. And not only that, a lot of the characters are literally just useless in this game. Each one has a power-up that they can grab throughout the stage. There's usually a handful of them scattered on a track. You know, for some characters, it means like you shoot your opponent. Other characters, it means a turbo boost. And some characters just have like a speed boost, or like they're not calibrated, they're not balanced so that each character makes sense to play. Some literally just will never be able to win races. Yeah, not only is there barely any content here, the content that is here is horribly mangled. You know, characters are useless in some cases. So I keep this around because it's just shocking how quick and ridiculous this game is. But yeah, it is not one that I recommend for pretty much anybody. This next one I honestly keep around because I just find the story of the developers just so hilarious and just amusing. That is a game by the company Miracle Designs, and this is Miracle Space Race on the PS1. Now, if you guys are not aware, Miracle Designs was a developer that pretty much exclusively made kart racing games. And you might go, you know, good to get good at one genre of game and just master it and perfect it. The problem is, not only did they not perfect it, but basically they made the one game and just reskinned it ad nauseum on repeat for years. I honestly amazed that they had even the run they did. If you guys aren't aware, Miracle Designs actually started, I believe their first game may have been Atari Karts on the Jaguar. They then later made a game on the new one called Merlin Racing. If you guys aren't aware of the new one, that was like a DVD player that had game support, very obscure system. But after that really kind of fizzled out, they decided to take the work and effort they had put into those games and release 4 of these on the PS1 alone. And the funny thing is, I keep this one around because it's probably the most unique of their games, because instead of just like basic cars, you actually get a little hovercraft here. It's got a space theme. Yeah, it is essentially the same game that they kept making on repeat. But yeah, these were budget titles at the very least. These usually came out in the twilight years of the PS1. This one came out in 2003, so very late release, budget release. It's meant for children, so I can kind of maybe sort of give them a pass. But even then, like, knowing what they did to make these games, it's honestly kind of impressive how resourceful it is. But at the same time, you can't help but feel like they were kind of ripping off their customer base that in a lot of cases probably just didn't know any better. And this game is also very short, only has 9 tracks. There are 3 tournament cups. You can basically 100% the game in about 20 minutes. Now, you guys probably remember Razor scooters, right? And you might remember Razor Freestyle Scooter, which was kind of an answer to Tony Hawk with the Razor license. Not a great game, definitely no Tony Hawk, but it was kind of fun. Did you guys know that they took that engine, they gave it to another dev, and we got a racing spin-off in 2001 called Razor Racing? This is by a company named Visionscape, and I have to imagine all that was done here was that they were given the engine from Freestyle Scooter, they were given some assets, and were told to probably make a racing game as quick as they possibly could, because that's how it comes off. I think Razor was just super hot at the time. Crave owned the rights to making these games, and they wanted to make some bank. This is a abysmal racing game. I sort of like it for all its bad garbage charm, but this is genuinely a terrible game. There are only 3 tracks in this game. The visuals are significantly worse than most things released on the console in 2001. It has horrible frame rate issues as well, which are made even more apparent. The fact that this game is padded, there are only 3 tracks, but you're forced to play them twice. And the first time is just like a time trial where you're by yourself racing the clock. And then the second time is the proper race, and they add other players in, and just the polygons, and these are like low polygon models, the extra polygons from the other racers tank the frame rate in the actual races, which is just abysmal. I don't know how this game could be so unoptimized looking as bad as it does. I'm amazed that it runs so poorly. But yeah, this is definitely an avoid at almost all costs unless you like your stupid, quick, janky PS1, especially like the Twilight bargain bin years of the PS1. This next one is an interesting one because I think the idea they were going for made sense on paper, but just the execution falls very flat, and that is Slam Dragon. This is published by Jalico. This was Japanese only. Essentially, the twist that this game has is that it is a fighter that presents itself kind of as 3D. It plays on a 2D plane, but the backgrounds are 3D, and the characters are seemingly 3D models. Essentially, they're just pre-rendered digitized sprites. Again, it makes sense on paper because the character models in this are actually like pretty high polygon count. So I think the idea was like, let's make some really nice detailed looking characters and we'll render them ahead of time so that we can save headroom on the hardware for the backgrounds and it'll play at a nice frame rate. The problem is, you know, this doesn't play 60 FPS. It maybe plays 30. Because the characters are pre-rendered, it automatically makes the combat less fluid, less responsive, less satisfying. You know, I don't think it's necessarily an awful fighting game on the PS1, but I think there's a reason we didn't really see this happen very often, and especially in the later years of the PS1, most games either went full 3D, full 2D. This weird halfway in between gimmick just didn't quite work out for this one. And last but certainly not least, I had to include this one, and this is a game that I ended up picking up just kind of in a lot because it came with other games that I genuinely wanted, and that is South Park. For those that don't know, this is the infamous FPS that also released on PC and N64. Not only is this already a game that I just don't think is very good, I think level design wise, gameplay loop, I mean, just all of it is not well thought out at all. I think they just got tunnel vision. They didn't realize we can make a game that looks and sounds and kind of makes sense as a South Park game. Did they forget to make a fun game here? I just don't get it. You're throwing snowballs at turkeys, and that is like pretty much the whole damn game. I don't know many people that have had the patience to try and get much further than that, and I don't think there is much more to see. The reason that this one is even exceptionally bad is because for the cutscenes on this, if you guys are unaware, the developers took the N64 version, which I guess was like their flagship system for this game, if you can say that. They took the N64 cutscenes and just like poorly recorded them and stuck them on this disc. They took the actual N64 version and just like backported it, recorded it, slapped it on the disc, and they were like, yep, that's good enough for the cutscenes for this. It's so painfully obvious, even on like a bad TV. It's just shocking that this made it through QA and was considered acceptable. An already bad game even made 100% worse by just sheer laziness and an incredible lack of foresight. So guys, those are the 10, I would say 10 worst games in my PlayStation 1 collection. Hopefully this came as a good warning if you have looked at any of these games or maybe see them in the future. I would probably have to say on these, steer clear unless you just really are fascinated by some of these weirdo games. I have to admit I'm also the same way. Just some of these bad games are strangely fascinating. Let me know in the comments down below what games you consider the worst on the PS1. There are definitely way more. These are games that I personally feel like are still worth hanging on to, or for some reason or another. There are definitely worse games on the PS1 that I will probably never buy because they're frankly just too bad to even want to own. So maybe I'll do another video about that in the future, but until then guys, thank you again so much for watching and subscribing, and see you in the next one. Oh yeah, the turkey tanks have assholes, by the way, that are like just front and center. If I feature this in a video on YouTube, I probably have to blur this.